First time I experienced macro PK was way back in graduate school. It was a time I knew absolutely nothing about parapsychology. It was a slow day in Northampton, Massachusetts, and a couple of friends came over. We'd seen the only movie in town, and they said, well, let's play this game called Table Up. And what they meant was, let's have a seance. Now, they didn't know anything about parapsychology either, and they said they played this game a few times, and when it worked, it was a lot of fun. So for the next 3 hours, I watched my own table rise in the air and spell out answers in response to questions.
How did that make you feel?
Scared the hell out of me.
What did you think, what did you then think was happening at that point?
I wasn't really sure. I mean, ostensibly, we were communicating with various entities, and we did that by means of a very cumbersome code my friends had come up with. Because they knew nothing about parapsychology, they didn't know about the old spiritualist tradition of asking yes or no questions and having the table nod once for yes, twice for no, and so on. They had the table nod once for the letter A, twice for the letter B, and so on. So it took forever to get messages. So not surprisingly, we communicated with 3 entities in 3 hours.
So were the wraps on the table, or did the table...
The table rose up on one side and nodded up and down, and we just counted the number of nods.
Did you back then expect each other to be cheating?
Well, I wasn't sure whether they'd be cheating or not, but it was clear that they weren't, because we're often standing next to the table. Our fingers were lightly touching the table. If one friend went to the other room for a brief time, there were 2 of us left, the table rose under our fingers. So it was clear there was no way normally it could be raised in that way. And also, my friends were not practical jokers. I'm not even sure they had a sense of humor.
So given your brain state back then, did that kind of shatter your view of reality in any way? Did you think, what the hell is going on? Everything's different than I always thought it was, or was it just another?
I was pretty cowardly about it. I didn't allow that event to infiltrate my worldview, because at the time I pretty much fancied myself to be a kind of hard-nosed materialist, not for any particularly good reasons. It was just the kind of intellectual conceit I was cultivating back then. But I was busy writing a dissertation on temporal logic and the philosophy of language. And I knew my mentors wouldn't be very sympathetic to hearing about this, so I knew I couldn't really confide in them about it. And I was motivated to get my PhD, get a job, and so on. So I literally put it out of mind until I got my PhD, got a job, and got tenure. So, I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid. So I like to think respectable mainstream philosophy for a number of years, got tenure. And at that point, I remembered what had happened to me back in grad school, and I figured if I was an honest academic and philosopher, I needed to really confront this experience. I also knew at that point that a number of major philosophers had taken psi research sufficiently seriously to write about it. So I read what they had to say and decided there was something worth sinking my teeth into.
So was it more out of general interest, though, or you felt that there was a dissonance with your materialist worldview that just didn't go together? I mean, did it create some kind of a, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, at the time I wasn't sure whether what I observed could be incorporated smoothly or otherwise into a worldview that I was comfortable and familiar with. But I felt an obligation to my profession and to myself to look into this. The best case of macro PK that I had experienced before the Felix group was the case I wrote about that I called the Gold Leaf Lady. This was a woman in Florida whose body would spontaneously break out in a golden-colored, very thin foil, looking a little bit like an even thinner version of wrapping from Hershey's Kisses. And what I didn't know about that, and to this day don't know, is whether I was observing a materialization or an apport. But I'm absolutely convinced it was real. I observed it many times under conditions where fraud would have been easily ruled out.
That would still be broadly in the category of macro PK, though, or is that something else?
Well, if it's an apport, if it's something being transported from one place to another, I think that qualifies as an instance of macro PK. If it's a case of materialization, that's often considered a classical form of macro PK. I mean, PK is simply the production of some physical phenomenon, but not according to any of the standard causal lines that we're aware of.
And other than that, other than the gold leaf lady and your first table sittings, did you have other table sittings ever since that before the Felix group?
None that worked. I tried, but I may have been experiencing the fear of psi at that point when I was trying it. Apart from a few aborted attempts to make the table rise again after that first graduate school case, situations didn't really present themselves. I mean, by the time I found myself as a professional employed philosopher, my colleagues and others I knew were not really into this. So I was getting into it cold at that point.
What is the fear of psi now?
The fear of psi is, I think, a complex state of mind. The easiest way I know to explain it is this. Suppose I can move a pencil, let's say, a millimeter just by thinking about it. It's a very small step conceptually from doing that to making somebody drop dead by thought alone. So I think the reality of any PK at all forces us to take seriously a kind of magical worldview that most of us associate, usually condescendingly, only with so-called primitive cultures. It's a worldview where our thoughts can have various kinds of both intended and unintended consequences, both benign and malevolent. And it's a worldview in which we might potentially have to take responsibility for a range of things we'd just as soon be bystanders for. So if I have a nasty thought about someone and then that person has an accident, if you really take this worldview seriously, you might have to take seriously the possibility that your thought had something to do with it. And frankly, that's a way of looking at things that you don't find very often in Western industrialized cultures. Certainly there are places in the world where that kind of thinking is quite common and taken for granted. But modern science has been tending to make causality increasingly impersonal over the centuries. And this just puts the person right back smack in the middle. I think it's psychologically conducive to successful mediumship for the medium not to feel personally responsible. I mean, look at it this way. If no phenomena occur, I mean, traditionally the best mediums have always regarded themselves as mediums, as vehicles or intermediaries between the spirit world and this world. And the way to think of it is this. If no phenomena happen, or if only uninteresting phenomena happen, the medium doesn't have to feel personally like a failure. The medium can always attribute these failures to an inept communicator or to a bad link with the spirit world. And perhaps more important, if good phenomena occur, then the fear of psi could kick in. The medium wouldn't have to feel responsible personally responsible for the phenomena. In the case of PK, she wouldn't have to say to herself, holy crap, if I can produce this under the safe confines of a seance, who knows what havoc I might be wreaking when the seance is over. So they don't have to experience for themselves the fear of what Freud called the omnipotence of thought.
What is the relationship between the fear of psi, Freud's omnipotence of thought, and Bacheldor's resistance ownership, resistance and witness inhibition? Is the two terms that he coined, are those more or less just more precise ways of defining fear of psi?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, Bachelor wasn't the first person to write about this. Long before Bachelor, Jewel Eisenbud was writing about this. And he had some very penetrating things to say about the fear of psi and how it expresses itself not only in the large-scale phenomena, but how it expresses itself even in laboratory experimental quantitative experiments. So Jewel posited that experimenters might be expressing their fear by being so methodologically obsessive about getting all kinds of details right that they manage to snuff out the phenomena, or that they make mistakes which they retrospectively realize they shouldn't have committed and they know better not to commit. But these are the kinds of things that can undermine their own evidence for it. And Charlie Tart's been writing about this for a number of years as well, and has pointed out that experimenters might suppress phenomena to the extent that they get significance at the 0.05 level, just enough to merit publishing a paper saying they got positive results, but not impressive enough to really threaten their worldview.
So they're sabotaging themselves subconsciously.
That's one possible manifestation of it as well, sure.
What would be a way to get around this problem of fear of psi?
I don't know what you do about avoiding the fear of psi if all you're doing is conducting lab experiments. I mean, I think in general that's a poor way of trying to get convincing evidence for the existence of psi anyway. But as long as you're conducting field investigations or investigating superstar subjects, even then I'm not sure what to give as general advice. For standard group table sittings, I think Bachelor had a good idea. Sing songs, tell jokes, take yourself out of the picture as much as you can.